Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open as always, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email live at asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Now, Steve is not joining me for this episode tonight, but I had a chance to connect with him for down in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so on the way back to Grand Forks, an absolutely delightful time. I'll tell you about it as the show goes on. A couple of things that made the list is found a couple of nerd projects to dig into. Always have nerd conversations with Steve. But I also found a $50 set of hardware that I can almost promise you have absolutely no idea that this thing even exists. And if you're in the market for such a piece of hardware, it's going to change your life. Then Ring has a partnership with Flock, or had a partnership with Flock. That's getting canceled. I'll tell you why I think that's a really great thing for privacy. Before all of that, though, we'll head to the Linux Newswire newsroom. We'll get the latest from JT. He's standing by with the latest.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of February 15th, 2026, here's the Linux and open source news. OpenVPN 2.7 has been released. Mesa 26.0 is out. The KDE team has announced the release of KDE Frameworks 6.23. The GNOME team has released GNOME 49.4. Vim 9.2 is now available. The GNU Linux Libre project has announced their deblobbed version of the 6.19 kernel. GNU BinUtils 2.46 has been released with AMD Zen 6 support. In distro news, TinyCore 17 is out. Voyager has released its version of Debian 13.3. ParaOS 26.2 has been announced with its new liquid gel design. MythTV 36 is now available. Parrot 7.1 has been announced. In open source security news, a new Linux botnet, SSH Stalker, uses old-school IRC for its command and control comms. Lockbit 5.0 ransomware expands its reach across Windows, Linux, and ESXi. And in open source AI news, ZAI's open source GLM5 has been released and appears to achieve record-low hallucination rates thanks to its new reinforcement learning SLIME technique.
I remember the first time I saw a computer control a door, and I thought, this has to be the coolest thing I've ever seen. And shortly thereafter, somebody gave me a key fob, and I was able to use a key fob to unlock the door. And I thought, man, this is the ticket. I don't know why anybody would ever want to use a key when it's so much faster to present a small little credential to a door, and then the door opened. And for the last 20 years, that fascination with access control hasn't really left me. Now, anytime we talk about access control, I want to start with my typical disclaimer. And my typical disclaimer is this, that any sort of physical security, locks for the most part, are there to keep the honest people honest. That is to say, when somebody walks up to a door and they pull on the handle and the door does not immediately open, it's the person on the other side of the door telling you you're not welcome on this side of the door. I say that, and I put that disclaimer out there because, yes, there are ways to overcome physical access control. Yes, there are ways to hack. Yes, there are ways to duplicate credentials. There's ways to do all of those things. And so there are some situations in which you have big concrete walls and you have a system that is designed with a private-public key pair, and you pair that with security cameras and armed guards and a security station that's monitoring people that are coming and going. You can absolutely do all of that. That's not really what we're talking about, though. And that's not really the boat that most people find themselves in. And so the bar I'm asking you to evaluate with me is matching or exceeding the level of difficulty that it would take for me to throw a rock through a window and climb it. With that disclaimer out of the out of the way. I have played in a lot of sandboxes with access control over the years. And there's a couple of things that all kind of stand out in common, that they all kind of share. Different manufacturers, different ways of doing things, different periods of time, different software, all of those things. But they all share some core concepts. And I thought we'd take some time to kind of break that down. So following that, I am going to tell you about one of the coolest gadgets that you can get for less than $50 and you didn't even know that it existed. So let's start here. All access control is essentially divided into 4 components. The first component is a power supply. We're talking about access control. We're talking about the ability to walk up to a door and the door electronically locks or unlocks. And so if you're going to do that right, you want a physical power wire to the door. Typically that power wire is going to be 12 volts DC or 24 volts DC, but you want some form of power, and whatever the device is, you want that to be a good device producing the power. Second component is the controller itself. That's the thing that makes the decisions. So something is feeding it a key or a credential or a thing, and then the controller is making the decision to either lock or unlock the door, and then the controller is in one way or another sending a command either to an external relay that is turning power on or off, or the controller sometimes is capable itself of setting power, but there has to be a controller to make the decisions. The third component is the credentials in the reader. And so this is what you might think of by way of the little prox reader that you present your key fob to or your key card to. Modern iterations of them include things like Bluetooth Low Energy, in which you might have a little app that acts as their credential, and it talks to the reader via Bluetooth Low Energy. And so if the phone is within a certain range of the door automatically opens. You may have seen some of these things. But every access control system has some form of a credential, a key of sorts that you use, and a reader that you present those credentials to. And the last component is the locking mechanism. That's the physical thing that's on the door that locks or unlocks. And so there's a number of different ways that you would have that, right? You might have an electrified cylinder, and that's essentially like a traditional lock set, but there's a little 12-volt wire. If you apply 12 volts to it, it unlocks the door and the cylinder can rotate. You might have a door strike. This is very popular. Steve and I are in Minneapolis right now, and we went to essentially it's like a game center in which there's a bunch of different rooms, and each room has a different game. And so you present your wristband to the little reader on the outside, and then it tells you the instructions of the game. If it's in use, it makes you wait. If it's free, then it lets you in. The way they're doing that is with electric strikes. And so the way an electric strikes works is everything on the door itself stays the same. What changes is on the door jamb or the door frame. Typically where that little strike plate is that keeps the door shut, an electric strike has the ability for that to go, for lack of a better way to say this, limp. And then as the door tries to go against it, instead of holding it taut, the door can freely open. And you also have things like magnetic locks. So an electromagnet is essentially you take a magnet, a coil, you apply some energy to it, and it creates a super strong magnet. It's the same way that, for example, they pick up cars inside of a wrecking yard. They use a big magnet. That's an electromagnet, and so you can generate a tremendous amount of force. And so a small electromagnet will generate about 600 pounds of holding force. A large electromagnet can generate around 12 to 1,500 pounds of holding force. And that is to say that you would need 600 or 1,500 pounds, respectively, of force between the two to separate the magnet and the plate. Reality is that most doors and most frames and the way that most construction is built is not going to hold up to that kind of force. And so the lock there is not the weak point. And then bonus, oftentimes when you're going through the trouble of wiring a door, you're going to put some manner of a door monitor in. And so these days they have door monitors. I'll have some links for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com, but basically they're all but invisible. You drill a small little hole in the door, and you place, it's a little magnetic sense that goes inside the door, and then there's a little steel plug that you drill on the door frame. Actually, I guess it'd be the other way around. The little plug would go into the door itself. The magnetic sense would go into the door frame. And when the door is open, if you were to look along the hinges, you would see that little, what looks like a little circle, a little white circle. But past that, you would not be able to see that there is a sense on the door. And that lets you do all manner of things, from detecting if the door has been held open too long, tying into Home Assistant to say the door is open or the door is closed, choosing when to fire if you have an electric deadbolt, when you want that deadbolt to fire. Maybe you only want the deadbolt to fire if the door is in the closed state. And so you can build all of that into the door. So you wire the door one time, you put all of these things in the door, they become invisible, but you might see some of those extra things as kind of like a bonus. So if I was to divide this up into best practices, first best practice, use access control cabling. There's a lot of ways to wire doors. Some of them are better than others, but I would tell you, purchase access control cable. The gorilla in the room is the Honeywell Genesis series cable, and it's cable that is specifically designed for access control. It has a reader wire for connecting your access control reader. It has a lock control for actuating the lock. It has a door sense wire for connecting to those recessed door sense, what makes it impossible to see, we talked about. It often has some extra wires by way of if you need maybe a constant 12-volt source for powering some device at the door. It will have a set of wires for the request to exit. And so there are some times on the secure side you might want to manually trigger the door. That's certainly the case with things like magnetic locks. You need a way to unlock the door. And so you can do that with a request to exit, but you need a set of wires for that. And so essentially what they do is they have each of these sets of wires, and then they bundle them into a larger bundle. And so you pull access control cable, strip out the outer sheathing, and then you get these little groups of wires, and typically they'll be labeled. Now, if you want the NOAA budget-friendly way to do this, vertical cable. Vertical cable makes access control cable. It doesn't have the fancy little labeling on the inside, but it does have the bundles. It does have the appropriate gauges that you need, and it is a fraction of the price of Honeywell Genesis. So if you're interested in the budget approach, check out vertical cable. And then wire all of this back to a central room or a central wiring location. Increasingly, what I'm seeing is a lot of places or companies are trying to put all of the electronics in or around the door. First of all, it's messy. Second of all, it is prone to problems. And the third thing I don't like about it is that even apart from it not looking neat and nice, it makes it very difficult if you ever want to switch brands. And so if, by contrast, every door you want to access control, you pull one run of access control cable, pull it to the door jamb, and then kind of spider it off, drop one series of wires down to, if you're going to use a trike or electric door cylinder or those sorts of things, take the reader wire and put it on either the door. We'll oftentimes put it on the door frame itself, but you could also put it on the wall adjacent to it, just wherever you think it would look nice. You do it one time, get all the wires hidden, and now you're done with that door. And so if you ever want to come back and change brands, well, you go back to the central room where you have the controller, and you take out the screw terminals and pull the old controller down and put the new one up. Requires a different reader? No problem, boss. Go back to the door, take the reader off the wall, disconnect the cable from the reader control, put the new reader on, and plug it back in. And it just makes, in the same way that we wouldn't put a bunch of new wiring in every time we wanted a new light or a new lamp, or a new Ethernet device, kind of treat doors the same way. And so if you pull them all back to one central room instead of trying to do the wiring in the door itself or around the door itself, I just think it keeps things looking neat, nice, and enables a lot of future proofing. Magnetic locks in particular are some of the most involved to wire, because you're typically, the controller is closing a relay to apply power or closing a relay to take away power. Typically, there's a battery backup involved in there. So you're not going to want all of that stuff near the door. It's going to make a lot more sense to have all of that stuff in some sort of mechanical room, inside of some room, inside of a closet, just somewhere out of sight. And so pull it all back to a central location. Avoid relying on the cloud. I would tell you, even avoid running a computer with software. I'm going to pick on cloud for a second. To a degree, I understand how we got there. Okay, so there, to a degree, I get it. Cloud-based access control makes sense. But access to your building behind a paywall or a cloud service is a bad idea. take it to the bank. So about a year ago, there was a hotel. The hotel has an encoder to program keys for the rooms. That encoder has a public-private key pair, and the private key exists on the encoder. So the idea is that you can't just take any encoder and program a key for room 108 at the XYZ hotel. To protect that private key from being lost, there is a whole series of protections. The first is there's a primary power supply. Then there's a backup battery. The backup battery is secured with a special screw over the battery cap, and then in addition to all of that, we put tape and labels all over the place saying, do not disconnect from power, bad things will happen. We get a call. The front desk person decides that he or she is going to moonlight as a tech troubleshooter. And so what's the first thing you do when something doesn't work? Well, you turn it back off and turn it back on, Noah, right? Well, right, except in this case, you can see where the story is going, right? Power supply gets disconnected, all the tape comes off, the labels come off, the screw comes out, the battery comes out, private key lost. So we get the call. I arrive at the hotel to a lobby full of human beings. All of these human beings are not happy because they are just been told by the hotel that either we just arrived at this hotel and we don't have a room to check you in, or worse, we arrived at this hotel, we checked in, all of our stuff is in our room, and nobody can open the door. So we show up on site, we're here to fix the problem, but there's a problem. For obvious reasons, they don't give Noah the private key to reseed the encoder. Right? They don't let Noah do that. There is only a select group of people working for the manufacturing company that have the ability to reseed the encoder with a private key. Those people only exist at a central office, and the only way that they're able to remotely talk to these encoders is through this very special serial modem thing. So, not our first rodeo, been doing this for 20 years. We have all the equipment. We know the people to reach out to get the appropriate people involved, contact the manufacturer to get the encoder reseated, all of the things. So we make the call. And the answer I get is, I'm sorry, sir, those special people left at 6, and you're calling us at 7 p.m. We don't have anybody to unprogram that encoder. Well, when will those people return? I ask. When can we reseed this encoder and get all of these people back into their hotel room? Oh yeah, about 7 in the morning. Tomorrow. Right. So what would you like me to tell this hotel full of people who want to get into their hotel room, who cannot get into their hotel room because the lock, which is otherwise perfectly functional, is at a standstill because I need you to program your thing? And the answer I got in the end was, not our problem, we don't care. So in the end, the hotel ends up drilling every single lock to get people into their rooms so they can get their stuff out. I'm going to go ahead and guess many of them weren't return customers. It was a bad night for everybody involved. And the moral of the story here is, the cloud's going to work until it doesn't. The cloud is good enough and convenient until it isn't. The cloud is only as good as the person on the other end of the proverbial tunnel. And that night, there was no response from the proverbial tunnel. You had technical people. We had technical things. We had all of the equipment to do the thing. But the cloud wasn't on, for lack of a better way to say that. And it reinforces this idea that a reliance on a cloud, or even a proprietary software that requires a particular software key or an activation or any of those things, if you're relying on it to get into your building, I submit to you respectfully, you're barking up a tree for problems. Fourth thing, use high quality equipment. There's absolutely nothing worse than being on the lock side of a broken door. It is absolutely a horrible, helpless feeling. And oftentimes, not always, oftentimes the things you have to do to get onto the other side of the locked door to fix the problem are destructive in nature. And so it's one of those you pay me now, pay me later kind of a thing. You are far better served to just spend the money the first time and buy high quality equipment. don't skip on the locking mechanism. Do not skip on the locking mechanism. You can buy electric strikes for $20. You're getting what you pay for. The number one problem I see with electric strikes, bar none, the number one problem is people struggle to open them under pressure. So that is to say, if the door does not perfectly align correctly, then the door is being pulled a little bit and the electric strike triggers, but you have to push to release the tension on the door, then pull to open it. And I have seen it in the industry where people are like, oh, push, then pull. I just don't like that. No, fix the strike. Build the strike better. And so there is a company that does that. It is Adams Rite, and they make the Adams Rite 7400. The Adams Rite 7400 is the only strike I've ever seen that consistently unlocks under a load, and it's a heavy load, by the way. If the door isn't lined up right, if somebody's pulling on it before they swap, any of those things, all those problems just go out the window. And the Adams Rite 7400 just works. Once in a blue moon, and I do mean in a blue moon because this isn't even that often. You got to go and lubricate the lock, but for the most part, they just keep working. I don't think I've ever seen one fail. So if you're looking for a great electric strike, Adams Rite 7400's just shy of $200, and it's the best strike money can buy. Second one is for Maglocks Securetron. Now, this I have a bit of a mixed bag on. I have had some experience with other maglocks from other manufacturers, and I'd be lying to you if I told you I could really tell a difference. I suppose to some degree the reality that we're all living in is that once we kind of figure out how to do a thing, if there aren't moving parts, there really isn't a whole lot to break. And so do I have I used and do I have in my own home some maglocks that are made by other companies like Secularm? Yeah, I do. Have I had any problems with them? Can't say that I have. So for the most part, I stand by what I say by way of buy high quality equipment. And if you're looking for the tried and true, nobody ever got fired for buying, you're probably looking at Securetron. Now, interestingly enough, both Adams Rite and Securetron are both owned by a parent company, Assa Abloy. I don't know what that means, but I'm just telling you, if you're looking for the nobody ever got fired answer, Securetron for maglocks and Adams Rite 7400 for strikes. Next on the list is power supplies. Okay, anytime we're talking about electronic access control, we need electricity or we don't have access control. And so buy a high quality power supply. If you can't power the lock, everything else doesn't matter. So, and if you're in an application where you need constant power, Meanwell makes a phenomenal power supply. In fact, if you look at a lot of high-end gear, if you pull it apart, oftentimes what you're going to find is a Meanwell power supply on the inside. If you need a little bit more ability to do things like relay power on and off, so for example, magnetic locks. Oftentimes the way that I will build a magnetic lock system, I will build the entire locking mechanism with an electronics power supply and a magnet lock, and then the controller just is a relay to say, please unlock the door, but actually all of the mechanics are happening between an electronics power supply and the magnet lock. Now the reason I like it that way is a couple things. The first thing is, in our state, life safety code dictates that if there's a fire alarm panel, we have to interface to it. That is to say, if the fire alarm goes off, the doors must open if they're mag locks. And so the Altronics give you a fire alarm control panel input. And basically it supervises that input, and anytime that input is triggered, it automatically unlocks all of the doors. So it makes my job really easy from that standpoint. The second thing I really like about Altronics, they have a built-in place to put a 12-volt battery. So it handles all of the charging capacity. So by default, it will do things like keep the battery topped off, keep it at 12 volts. If the AC power ever fails, it automatically switches over to the 12-volt battery, runs the access control in the system. Then when AC is restored, it goes back to charging the battery. And I've used it to both power the controllers as well as powering the locking mechanisms. But get yourself a good power supply. The fifth thing, don't use unconventional credentials. Again, it's a wide world of access control. Everybody is making their own variant or their own thing, right? And that's okay to a degree, but where it falls apart and falls apart rather quickly is if the key fob is only available from one manufacturer, if the readers or the keypads don't follow some sort of standard and are only available from one manufacturer, you start to get yourself into a walled garden, and you can't get back out. And it makes wiring things difficult. It makes swapping things difficult. It makes keeping up to date difficult. It limits people's and options for things. So if you have the ability to not do it this way, I would implore you in the strongest possible way, don't do it that way. Use a key fob that is readily available from many different manufacturers. Pick readers or key fobs that follow some sort of a standard. So if you want some kind of go-to ones, MyFair is incredibly popular. MyFair is a proximity standard that was developed with the idea that you can use it it's what's used in hotel key cards. It is used in mass transit. If you've ever gone to like a train station, this is particularly prevalent in Europe. They use the MyFair Ultralight, and every one of the train ticket, bus ticket type things are encoded with a MyFair Ultralight 11, and you can, you tap it and it reads it. If you have ever gone to game places, so Steve and I this weekend spent some time at the Mall of America, and they have little passes that you can buy. And the passes take you into various different places. One of the places we went had a little wristband, and you put the little wristband on, and that's where it collects your points and does all of the various things. That wristband is MyFair tag, and so the readers are MyFair readers. So you can start there. There are competing standards. So there is the H10301, or the Wiegand 26-bit Wiegand standard. It's been around for, at this point, probably 20 years. It is incredibly common. It is incredibly cheap. So there are wristbands, there are rings, there are keypads, just you name it, they make it with that standard available. And again, to those of you that are like, no, Wiegand, I saw this video on Hackerspace, or I saw this video at DEF CON that showed, right. So back to, again, if you're looking for a full-on like concrete bunker, super secure, arm guards, all the things, it's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying if I can throw a rock through your window, it's not worth my time to follow you around someplace or wait to get to your front door to take your reader apart so I can insert a serial capture so I can track it. Nobody's doing that, right? I'm going to throw a rock through your picture window, and I'm going to come in that way. So we got to keep the main thing. But following a standard means that credentials are super cheap. You can buy a pack of 100 fobs for like $25 if you're following some of these standards. And so it makes it incredibly scalable. It means that your choice of readers are almost unlimited. But whatever you do, pick a conventional credential, however it is you want to do that. Okay? We look at the landscape, what's kind of been around, what is around, and where are we going with it. So at the very tip top of the pyramid is Mercury. Mercury is a manufacturer of the actual controllers, access controllers, that are used in all the major brands. They all, in the end, they're all buying Mercury controllers, and then they're flashing them with their own firmware. And so this is where the big dogs in the industry, Genetec and Avigilon and Carry, and all these companies that are manufacturing Alarm.com, all of them, if you pull off the hood and you look underneath, there's a Mercury controller under there. Okay? Then you have smaller companies that make bespoke products. So they're making their own controllers, and they oftentimes require their own proprietary software. But there is a diamond in the rough, and that is the Axis A1001. If you've listened to this program for any length of time, you've undoubtedly heard me talk about it and sing its praises. It is a full-fledged controller. It is by far the best controller I've ever worked with in my 20-plus years of working with Axis Control. It can be powered by PoE, or you can power it with a conventional 12-volt power supply. It has a built-in web interface for all the configuration, just like an IP camera, so it doesn't require any software, it doesn't require any apps, it doesn't require any services. I will be able to take an A1000, I will be able to take an A1001 10 years from now, and I absolutely believe I will still be able to pull a brand new one out of a box and be able to configure it and be able to control a door just like I'm doing today. And I think that's awesome. So it is timeless by way of the way that it's built. It can power a lock itself, or it can simply act as a relay for a power supply like an Electronics. So let me tell you why that's important. So let's say we're coming into a place that already has access control in. They had some very proprietary thing. So you unscrew the screw terminals, you pull all the proprietary stuff out, and then you're left with a bunch of wires. And I've got my lock control and I got my reader wires. I can just plug all of those wires into the Axis A1001, and the relay system in the Axis A1001 says, okay, when the lock is supposed to be unlocked, close this relay. When the lock is supposed to unlock, close this relay, or vice versa. But it can just be a stand-in replacement for a controller. But wait, it gets better. So what happens when you have a door that you never intended to put a key fob on, and now all of a sudden you're standing in front of somebody saying, please make that door have a key fob? This is where the A1001 shines. You drop an Ethernet cable. We in the network world, we're very comfortable. We're like ninjas at being able to get network cable in places that you never thought you could get network cable to. Get network cable somewhere in and around the door. Then the beauty of the A1001 is you can wire straight from the A1001 into the door. Now, I know what you're thinking. Noah, didn't you just tell me that best practice is to pull it back to a central location? 100%. And if you can do it that way, please do so. But what I'm saying is, in the event that you can't do that, in the event that you're in a building where that isn't possible, the A1001 looks like what effectively is an access point or a smoke detector. And so you can mount it right above a door. The only wire you need to run to it is Ethernet, and it will handle all of the powering of the locks within the controller itself. It'll handle the decisions, it'll power the reader, it will send the requisite power to the locking mechanism and open or unlock the door. It can do everything on board the controller itself, so it makes it a very versatile device. It can work with a standard Wiegand reader. It can also work with the newer Open Supervised Device Protocol, also known as OSTP, which is the replacement communication standard that's used in access control systems to enhance security but maintain that interoperability. And if you pair it with an HID multi-class reader or keypad, I've yet to find the fob that I can't enroll or read. So let me back up. I've yet to find the fob or credential that is some sort of mainstream standard that I can't read and enroll. I have found some that are esoteric, they only work with this brand sort of thing, and those are a problem. But then back to point number 5, don't use unconventional credentials. So in short, the absolute best controller I've ever had the pleasure of working with in 20 years. Now, unfortunately, and it pains me to say this, Axis discontinued the A1001. They replaced it with a new version of an Axis controller, but unfortunately that version no longer runs the software on the controller itself, which in my mind is a huge, huge letdown. Now, I do understand it, right? Axis is looking, and really the way that they designed this product from the beginning was, it's supposed to be this edge device where the door is just an edge thing, and then you give it an IP address, and then you add some sort of third-party thing that then controls all of the doors. And there are some, so for example, you can add it to an Exactvision access control system. You can add it to Genetec. So to a degree, I understand kind of what they were going for. And in the reality, probably the vast majority of customers that are buying their products want to use it in that capacity. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense for them to put the functionality onto the controller itself. Additionally, if you're baking that sort of functionality into the controller, you eventually run into system limitations. You just do. There's only so much memory on the controller. There's only so much processing power. There's only so much storage. So to a degree, I understand the boat that they're in, but my gosh, I have yet to find the organization that can't make use of the A1001s, and the ones that are big enough to where they do need they need the increased user capacity, they have a plan to do that. And even then, the Axis A1001 still makes sense to be used as the door controller. It just, then you offload to the software. But the fact that it can function all on its own, I just don't have enough good things to say about that. And so so somewhat disappointingly, I actually learned this lesson from a listener. So the listener reached out, said, "Hey, I hear you ranting and raving about the A1001 all the time. I bought the replacement. I can't add keys. I was able to log into the web UI. I can set an IP address, but I can't add users, add keys. I don't understand." And it turns out, yeah, the answer is it needs a piece of Windows software and it has to run on a PC. Huge disappointment. And so my answer in the meantime has been to purchase just the absolute stockpiles of controllers that come out and pray that something better comes along. And I believe that it will, and after tonight's episode, I'm even more confident that it will come. But at the moment, it's a diamond in the rough. Everything else has compromises. The A1001 checks all the boxes. Locally hosted. Requires no software subscription. Doesn't need the cloud. Everything on board the controller. Enough functionality that it's actually usable on the controller itself. It's just an amazing little piece of device. And so I'm still looking for a controller that can do everything that the A1001 can do. Haven't found it yet. But in my looking, I came across something I think you're going to be interested in. And it's one of the many things that come made out of what I'm just going to call Chinesium, because the actual brand is somewhat irrelevant. But the brand, as it were, on the Jungle Store is BS Tukey. BSTUOKEY. I have a link for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. And basically what it is, it's a feature-complete access controller that doesn't require any PC or any software. Now, instead of building software and building the configuration into a web UI, they haven't done that because it doesn't have the power to do that. But what it does do is they stripped it way down to just programming via jumpers. So here's the way it works. You take the controller out of the box. You apply 12-volt power. You jumper 2 pins together. The next key that you swipe on any standard Wiegand reader becomes the master key. Now, every time you want to add a key to the system, you swipe the master key and then swipe the key that you want to enroll, and Bob's your uncle. Now, there's a PDF that has a whole bunch of other functionality that you can do for configuring the users and doing all the things. It's not meant to be, you're not going to do time-based control, right? You're not going to set up schedules. You're not setting up access groups. It's, here's a door. Can somebody access the door? Yes or no. I want to enroll a key. I want to take away a key. That's it. That's what it does. But here's the best part. It's available for $18. Think about that. Think about an access controller that's available for $18. Doors you wouldn't ordinarily fob. Garage doors, storage rooms, sheds. All of a sudden, they weren't a cost-effective thing to fob. Now, all of a sudden, they became a cost-effective way to fob. And because it's a full-on controller and not some drop-in thing, it means that it has just regular screw terminals, so you can install everything else like you would a full-fledged access control system without breaking any of the practices I just laid out for you up front. You can still use proper access control cable. You can still avoid relying on the cloud. You can still use high-quality equipment. You can still use standard credentials and standard readers, all of those things. If you ever decide that, hey, this is not really the thing for me, or I need more than this little thing offers, then in the end, you can swap it. If you followed all the best practices to include central wiring, then it's just a function of unscrewing some wire terminals and plugging in a brand new Mercury controller and flashing it with whatever firmware you like and paying whatever absorbent fee that one of the big names are going to charge you, and you're back in business. But from the user's perspective, same lock, same power, same door. And the more I thought about it, even though it's Chinesium, even though it's an $18 Chinesium little board, I have a feeling that if you paired it with a solid power supply, like a Meanwell or an Eltronics, if you paired it with proper lock control mechanism, like an Adams Right Strike or like a Securetron, you could achieve the same reliability that you'd get with some of the big names. So I have one on the way. I am going to take it. I am going to install it as if I were installing, not in somebody's business, obviously, but as if I were installing a regular access control system. And I am going to test drive the heck out of this thing. And I'm going to see what I think. Just for funsies, I ordered both they call it a TM Wiegand 26 RFID card reader access control system. I think basically what they did was they took in Chinese and said, what are all the words that somebody would search the Jungle Store for, and that's what we're going to call our product. I ordered that. From the same company, I also ordered one of their little proximity readers. The thing that is interesting to me is mostly that the proximity reader was $17. So my thought is, for $38.93, I have a complete system ready to go. I also kind of am amused by the fact that their little reader is basically the size of a little button cell battery. And so I have some aspirations and some dreams and some fantasies about, could I paint that reader and could I put it in places that I ordinarily couldn't put an access control reader because of aesthetics or because of other concerns? And could I get away with that? And when I looked at their little demo video, the way that they were proving that it has the requisite rating for waterproofing is they put it into a bowl of water and then turned a sink on. I'm like, well, if I can take that, I can probably take a little spray paint. So I'm going to push this thing. It's $38. I'm going to push it to its limits. I'm going to see what I can get out of this. But I think this is a game changer. And the last thing I will leave you with is this. If we are at a point today in 2026 where for $38 you can order off of the internet a device that does what 20 years ago would have required a full-fledged PC and thousands of dollars worth of proprietary hardware, if today I can achieve basically the same thing, and it's considerably cheaper and available via 2-day Prime, imagine what this is going to look like for 5 or 10 years. It's not going to be long before some of these other manufacturers finally bake in a baked-in web UI. Now, to those of you that ask, isn't there something out there in the open source world? There is, and I'll have it linked in the show notes. It's called LeoSec, and it is open source access control. It's basically using a Raspberry Pi. My understanding of where this is at today is it's a really good start, but it is not a ready-to-go, production-ready deployment. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that the Chinese IM thing that I'm linking to you is, but I am suggesting that I think it's a little bit closer out of the box than LeoSec is. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and if you have any experience at all with it, I'd love to talk to you, or I'd love to get your thoughts on it. You can write in live@asknoahshow.com. But I'll put links to all of this in the show notes. I would invite you to check it out. I would invite you to give me feedback, and I'll make sure to follow up with you once this stuff gets in and once I have some hands-on. Ring has cut ties with Flock, citing a resource constraint mere months after the pair announced a partnership. The pair spoke about their intentions to work together on Ring's community request feature back in October, but Ring said this week that the integration would require significant more time and resources than anticipated. The Amazon-owned smart home company made no mention of it in the announcement, but the cancellation comes after a tricky time following the backlash for its recent Super Bowl ad. So if you haven't been following along, Amazon ran a Super Bowl ad in which they launched something called Familiar Faces. The way Familiar Faces works is the following. Every time you walk past a Ring doorbell, it records the face and or the signature of the person, dog, cat, whatever. Let's say a person is... Actually, let's take it the way that they did the Super Bowl ad. So it's this heart-wrenching, poor commercial of a lost dog, and if only there was a way to reunite Sparky with its owner. So what they did was, you go to this essentially search party functionality that relies on familiar faces and says, I have seen this dog or this thing here, and so you can go find the dog, right? Somebody comes up to your door and you recognize that person, you can enroll them in Familiar Faces. And so it's a combination of these two different features that are embedded into the Ring doorbell camera that have people, particularly in the privacy circles, kind of freaking out a little bit, saying, this is not cool. So I suspect they started to get heat from Flock. Or not from Flock, but because of their partnership with Flock. So if you're not familiar with Flock, Flock is a camera system that is heavily used by law enforcement. And the thing that is so terrifying and insidious about Flock is there is no warrant required because it's third-party data doctrine. It means they own everything. So a private company has entered into a public-private partnership to put these devices up all over the place. They record every license plate that goes by. They detect things like gunshots. They're looking for vehicles that are wanted and or the police want to talk to them for whatever reason. And it consolidates all of that into a database of sorts. And the idea behind this partnership, so far as I understand it, is that Ring was going to add to what is known as the police intelligence network. So all of these cameras are, you got to think about this, right? So I live in North Dakota. Steve lives in South Dakota. So the police in Fargo, North Dakota have an agreement with Flock. So they put a Flock camera up in Fargo, North Dakota, and my car drives by it. It records my license plate number. For any reason, some police officer in Sioux Falls, South Dakota says, I want to know when the last time Noah's car was seen and where it was seen. There is no warrant. There is no interstate agreement. There is no department-to-department agreement. So far as I understand it, if a police officer in Sioux Falls, South Dakota wants to use their agreement with the Flock system to trace down a vehicle or to track it down, they have access to the data from the Flock camera in North Dakota where it was recorded. They see this as a really powerful tool. This idea that we can share intelligence, we have the ability to track things across state lines, barriers can come down, it makes us all safer, all those sorts of things. Those of us in the privacy world find this terrifying. And so what Ring was attempting to do was join that surveillance network. It would have meant that the search party, which is aired on a Super Bowl ad to go find a lost dog, can then be paired with the police intelligence network when they're looking for something or somebody. And then Ring contributes all of those faces and all of that information back. Now, they're very clear to say that Ring had used a 30-second slot to highlight its AI-powered search party feature, which recruits Ring devices in a neighborhood to activate them when someone triggers a lost pet. All the devices switch on to locate the animal and reunite it with its owner. It's a cute idea, but in theory, when depicted in the video, many viewers say they saw it as a dystopian and question whether the technology could be used for more nefarious means, which, of course, it can. And immediately following that, even though there's not an official, so we got backlash from this, so we're canceling this, it follows a recently, and it was banned in a few states, where Ring had this facial recognition feature, as well as criticism leveled at Flock by privacy rights to include the EFF over using its license plate recognition system. And so they have, there are reports that they've routinely used their database searches that inform ICE activities. It's been highlighted for some concern, saying that it doesn't have any particular partnership with ICE or the Department of Homeland Security, and they don't have any direct access to their footage. However, the ACLU had pointed out that there was a media probe in which many police searches of Flock cameras were carried out on behalf of ICE. And so even if they don't give them direct access, they're going to the police departments. The police departments are saying, oh, we can run that search for you. It's just bad, no matter how you look at it. And no matter what your particular political color is, it's bad from a privacy standpoint. Go follow the law. Go get a warrant if you believe somebody has done something wrong. That's the way this stuff is supposed to work. And these private-public partnerships are shaking all of that up. And so I was horrified, frankly, to see the Super Bowl ad in which Ring is highlighting this search party feature. But I was, I guess, pleasantly surprised and maybe even a little relieved to see how much backlash Amazon received, because there are so many people that I interact with on a daily basis that when I point out how scary and terrifying this stuff is, the answer I largely get back is like, meh. Oh well. Oh well, no. What do you want us to do about it? In the end, we're getting tracked anyway. There's cameras everywhere anyway. Why do we care? Meh. Seems to be the going answer anytime you bring up concerns about privacy. And so, pleasantly surprised, thrilled in fact, to see that there is some pushback that is happening. I hope that it continues, and I'm thrilled that they canceled this partnership with Flock, because I think it would have taken a bad situation and made it much, much worse. And that brings us to the end of this week's broadcast. I thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate you accommodating a slightly different format as things are a little out of sorts this week. You can always find the show notes by going to podcast.asknoahshow.com. There you'll find not only the articles and references that we used to put the show together, but you can go all the way back to episode number 1. The full back catalog is there. Want more me? Want more Steve? We can get more Steve by going to X. Follow him on X at Linux Ovens. Follow the show at Ask Noah Show. I'm at Colonel Linux. You can also find other ways to connect with me and other things I'm doing by going to noahc.us. We'll be back live next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. Join us at AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.